Welcome back again to the second portion of my conversation with John Mazoero. Did I say that correctly?
Yes,
I did.
yes, Mazoero.
Who's an
Yes.
Alexander Technique teacher and a researcher. Is that correct to say you're a researcher?
Well, may I change your statement?
Yes.
I'm an initial Alexander teacher.
He's an initial
I am not
Alexander
teaching
teacher.
the Alexander technique with hands.
Yes.
I am a rogue teacher. Yes.
So
I want to make one comment.
Yes,
Is
yes,
that
absolutely.
what it means is that instead of imparting the correct thing to the person, what is interesting is to have the person negotiate what is the correct thing for herself and how to negotiate that without feelings. Is very interesting because it means that you can suddenly expand towards things you don't do, don't feel, that don't feel right, that feel absolutely awful, for example. Yes? So it's more the concept of agency, the concept of dominion over oneself that the person has, and not somebody doing it to you.
And also
which is different.
Also the world of feelings, the idea of our sensory domain, our sensory development, is continuously shifting.
Yes, that's correct.
So to be guided by something that is rightfully continuously shifting and dynamic would be well, I wonder how useful that would be if we're going to expose ourselves towards new experiences, which is learning.
That's a great problem that Alexander couldn't solve. His idea that the person receiving the correct adjustment, because he said, I can give it to them whether they want it or not. Meaning I can organize the different parts of their organism in such a way that they will be more balanced.
Yeah.
Yes. So that way they will sit with less movements apparent and more fluidity, more counter movements possible. It's difficult to imagine, but let's say, okay, he is able to do that. Well, then the feelings that will produce in a person that is basically badly organized. How can these feelings be the same as the feeling Alexander was experienced in producing the same movements himself? It's impossible. It's mind-boggling. How could he imagine that he could teach people with his hands is something I can't understand. Many people say that this is the only teaching of the Alexander technique, that if you don't feel the result, you don't get it. Well, what I say is that if you feel the result, you have no idea of the means whereby you can get them, because the feeling comes after. So you have to. So very often you see people make a reasoning jump backwards, a flip back, thinking, well, if the feeling is the result of this, then the feeling will help me create it. That's stupid. Well, sorry, it's unreasonable.
It's almost like saying it's almost like saying if a pen could suspend itself into midair by itself.
Yes, by itself. Yes. Or if the result of an action could be the same as the creation of that action. Very often people use some development of cerebral observation when they found some mirror neuron, and they say that, well, the actions are coded in the same way in the feeling side and the motor side. So they say if you have coded a movement, then on the motor side, so somebody repeats the movement for you, so your motor side will get the notion through your sensory side, then your sensory side will be able to reproduce the motor system. Well, that works only for very, very automatic movements. But what about, responding to new constraint? What about exploring new movements? So no, this cannot be a solution. So there is something that we must. I think we must go back to our gentleman sitting and trying to be more intelligent.
Yes, we're talking about the talking language use of language to overcome this problem.
Yes.
That Alexander couldn't.
Did it. Yeah. Yes. Okay, he had bad habits. He was moving all the time. He had unwanted movements all the time. And as everybody else, he tried to be better. He tried to suppress and to stiffen and to get grabbed at the floor, and it didn't work. Worse, there were side effects of trying to repress movement. Made him lost his voice. So that's when the consequences were dire, that he decided that there must be another way. Yes. So we need to have an idea of what are the means whereby. Well, the first means whereby I said was the attitude regarding sitting. How do I reason sitting? Which is a strange question, because for most people, we don't reason sitting. We just sit. That's it. Well, suddenly Alexander is saying, well, you must observe. You must experiment. You must link what you see with what you already know. So if you have an idea of law of motion, that if one rigid segment is acting on another one, this other one is acting on it. And if you have a chain, you have to understand that the actions and reactions are impossible to suppress, unless you have the structure fall, unless you have the person lie down. But there are very few schools that would accept people learning in lying down, and I don't think it would be a good idea, because it would, in fact, rob you of your capacity of solving problems. And if you start solving problems in one area, like sitting, it may well be possible that you can use the new activity, the new thinking in activity, in order to solve problems in other areas. It would be stupid to lie down. Do not lie down. By the way, I do not teach lie down ever. I stopped teaching lying down in 2000. It's quite some time ago now.
Yes.
So we have a conception that is now involving movements. And instead of suppressing movement, we want to produce movements. Well, yes, we want to produce movements, but how? And that's where the means whereby get clearer. So I want to give you a very simple explanation of the means whereby, so that you understand what we mean by employing means whereby in a conception of an action. For example, a conception of sitting. So I have this young gentleman. He's eager to become more rational. To be able to reason at a higher standard.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the picture, and we filmed at high speed, and it's discovered that in fact suppressing movement may not be the correct way. The correct way would be much better to imagine creating series of movements happening all together. Okay. So how do we start to understand what we mean by conscious guidance and conscious control? That's where you need a mediated instrument. That's where you need a mediating instrument. Something that.
What do you mean by mediating?
You will see. It's a very important aspect of Alexander technique, of Delsart system, and of Vygotsky ways of thinking. So I will explain during so that you see. I don't want to give an abrupt theoretical description that goes on well with the text. I want to give something that is practical, that everybody will get at it through the story. Okay? Yeah. So that person is used to guiding his movements by feeling. Why does he move the knees? Because it's becoming disagreeable, or there is something, an itch, and he wants to scratch, you see? The feeling and the response are there. You see them, and suddenly it's very easy to forget the perspective of the gesture.
Of sitting.
Suddenly you get to an arc system that is completely reductory, like a reflex, but it's not. Okay, so let's help the person to suddenly, first of all, control movements, and for that, you need a psychological instrument that was invented by Mr. Delsart. So this is how it goes. I asked the young man to locate a spot on the front of his pelvis. The pelvis is a bone, and I will guide him to use one finger and to place that finger on the protruding bone that is on the front of the pelvis. And so when the person has connected to say, oh yes, there is a bone there, so it's on the frontal part of the torso, fine. Well, it's something I feel, so for the moment, nothing has changed. There is no new element to guide the reasoning processes. But then you think, could you imagine a line? So you cannot imagine if you haven't got the story, if you haven't got the language. So this imagination is not random. It's very, very well directed. You think, could you imagine a line that is vertical? So we use a vocabulary of geometry, yes, that the person already knows by having been to school. If not, we need to explain what we mean by vertical.
Yeah.
So you can imagine a line that is vertical and going through the front bone of your pelvis. Okay, fine. So now, I am looking at you, young man, and I am looking at you from the side. So the subject is filmed sideways. And I say, if you touch the top of your sternum, which is the top part of your torso, would you say that I see that the sternum is forward of the vertical line of the front of the pelvis, or is it backward? I must note something, is that the person cannot feel the vertical line of the front of the pelvis, okay? So we are not talking of an elementary observation here. We are talking of someone using a higher mental function, that is visuospatial observation. The person has to decide if the throat is forward or is backward relative to the front of the pelvis. Most of the time, it's very interesting, the person is going to answer wrongly, which means that the first calculation the person makes is that the throat is not forward, that he says, but backward relative to it. Okay? Good. So it's just a thing you need to observe. Okay? And you think, oh, fine, this is what you observe. Fine. So now, on the center of your torso, there is a costal arch, and it's possible on that costal arch to place a ruler, a wooden piece that is rectilinear, and you place it on it, and you will find that there are two, ribs that are long enough to be on the frontal plane, and you can really connect your ruler with it, and then you ask the same question. Do you think that the middle of your torso, that line, is forward of the vertical of the front of the pelvis, or is it backward?
Yes.
Once again, you have one chance out of two that the person is going to answer wrongly. Well, it's more than one of two, because most of the time the person will answer wrongly. That's the first thing that is interesting, because from a perspective of gesture, of continuous movement happening all the time, there is no position as such. There's just moment that you can stop. For example, taking a picture with a camera, then you would stop it and you would see a position. But we know that this is just a figment of imagination. In real life, they are just gesture. They're just movements happening all the time. Good. So the person answers according to a representation he has of his form in sitting. It's not true. Well, true as seen from outside, as if you want to see if the person is calm and collected. Might it be described as calm and collected? Might it be described as having the front plane like vertical? No, not. It's very interesting to have the person suddenly realize by watching the video of his own recording and to think, oh dear, I said that my ribs were backward relative to the front of the pelvis, and in fact, they are forward. The person is using a tool to reason. It's not a feeling. It's not I feel I'm like this or I feel like I'm like that. It's I use a mediated function, which is a mental function that is using a psychological element, object that we call a vertical line, and we place it on a spot to compare where are other spots. This is what we call conscious control.
So a mediation is the word means to go between.
Yes, using a tool to, in fact, enhance a function. Well, let's start with something very simple. There is a problem with sitting, for example, is satisfaction. The problem is very simple. Mm-hmm. Do you want immediate satisfaction or not? That's the rule. Yes. And the rule is, no, you don't. You want to sit still. But for the moment, there is something that is itching and I want to scratch it. I would have direct satisfaction if I could scratch. Yes? Okay. So it's very clear nowadays that this capacity to resist direct satisfaction, immediate satisfaction. Remember, immediate means no mediation. Immediate satisfaction.
Immediate.
Yes?
Yes.
Immediate. Okay, so a child will develop his controlling functions, his intellectual capacity to control his own actions, which means instead of hitting somebody because it doesn't like the face, he would reason. He will engage into conversation, and he will discover that the person has different aspects that are likable, and they will compensate. They have a collection of ideas that will balance the immediate reactions. Okay, so these capacity of agency, they develop. They are not inborn. They are not innate, yes? No. And it's very interesting that there have been many studies of conscious control, in that sense, of the self, conscious self-regulation, if you want.
Yes.
And it's clear that the child, very early, from 5 to 6 years of age, starts to be aware of strategies of behavior. Strategies to resist immediate consummation of desire will and start, for example, one thing that is very important in learning is to be able to resist failure, resist the feeling that comes out of not succeeding. I wish I'd known that earlier. Well, and so when the child is using a tool to enhance a function, we are talking of a mediated action. Yes?
Yes.
To make it the simplest way as possible, because we are talking of practical intellect when we want to sit. It's clear that in human beings, the practical intellect starts before the verbal intellect. There are child of 2 years old or 1.5 that don't speak, or 1 year old that don't speak yet, and are able, like apes, like mammals of the higher species, to be able to solve mechanical problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, to bring something out of something. Or for example, I want to eat the sweet that is on top of the shelf, but I cannot reach. So enhancing human capacities is always there. How could I enhance the length of my arm? Well, I need to find a stick. I need to find a boot, something that will make me reach further.
Yeah.
As soon as you use a tool, you are starting to change the perspective. Yes. And so for the moment, I am speaking of mechanical tools, what we call external tools. But you have to imagine that it's possible also to solve problem by using internal tools, or we call it intellectual tools.
Yes.
You use an intellectual tool to enhance your attention, or to enhance your memory, or to enhance your reasoning capacity. This is called a mediated function. It's not memory proper, innate memory, eidetic memory. No, it's a new logical memory. It's not, elementary attention. It's reason attention. I want to be thinking about you. I want to be thinking about what I'm saying. I want to be thinking of the overall plan I'm following in these interviews. I don't want to be listening to what is happening outside. I don't want to see what's on the screen here.
Mm-hmm.
And I am directing my attention. I use language in order to do that. So it's mediated attention. So you have to think it very simply about mediated functions or means whereby. It's very simple.
It's the same.
It's always necessary to understand that some means whereby are adapted to the situation, adapted to learning more, adapted to experimenting, adapted to exploring, but some means whereby are deadly. You can use language to destroy yourself. You can use language to destroy your confidence. You can use language to destroy your capacity of resisting temptation. Language is a tool, you know. Tools can be used many different ways.
That's right.
As a teacher, you have to, in fact, help the pupil see that language, as interesting as it is, can be dangerous. And you have to have them reason the why and the wherefore and how you can use it. So then we have that person suddenly as in front of her or in front of himself, he has a video of himself answering a question, asking where is the middle of the torso relative to the top and the bottom of the torso. Well, that person will quickly see, because it's a film, that there are movements that produce these positions. You assume a position. What it means is that there are movements. You are making movements. And the person says, no, I'm not making the movements. They happen. It's not me. It's automatic. Is it so? And then you discover a new field, very interesting, where you need to experiment. Is it really automatic? Is it really beyond your control? Is it something that has been so habitual that you have no mastery over it, or not?
Yes.
Well, in the question, you have an idea of the answer. The answer is not. So the first thing is you control. So you see. So you say to the person, well, if I see a person that is sitting and I see the front part of the torso as a curve, can I reason something about what's happening at the back?
Yes.
Is the back straight? Is the back on the other side? If it's convex at the front, is it concave at the back or not?
So it's using higher capacities.
Yes.
To
solve. For the moment, is reasoning.
To solve a problem.
Using the experiment that has been made in order to suddenly decide of another experiment. What if you wanted to change that form?
Mm-hmm.
What if that form that is curved is not, exactly supportive? We know that for movements to happen, for the capacity of having the greatest number of movement, it's necessary to have support. If you are out on a limb, it's very difficult to imagine that you can have a movement between parts easily, because you're so afraid of falling that you will, use your normal strategy, which is suppression of movement.
Or just a reflex. So, the reflex of not falling.
It's a response. Yeah. I would not call it a reflex. It's a response.
Mm-hmm.
There is a clear feeling that you're falling. The response is I stiffen.
So the way this can be useful for musicians, for example, is that there's so much rotation and counter movements necessary to support the instrument, that a lot of people find that they run into trouble physically after a repeated action of playing and studying with the music. Whereas when you take the instrument away, you realize that without the instrument, you're also running into trouble of having enough support so that movements are happening in the way that you want, so that you have a plan for supporting yourself. Then when you get the instrument, you can be rotating, and the rotation is happening from a base of support that you're aware of, and that you can continuously apply movements to, so that you're not getting into a overly contracted or fixed position. Yeah. Does that make sense?
So, yes, but then now we have to go into the how, because I described how you can control consciously.
Yeah.
Well, you can control consciously if you use intellectual instruments that are not present, that you can't feel. You cannot control something by what you feel. Apparently, what you feel does not impress the camera.
Mm-hmm.
The performance on camera is not what you think it is. Yes, and so we believe in images. We believe in what we see. So we want to describe as someone else could describe. There is an objective way of dealing with this problem instead of dealing with the subjective way. The somatic way or the subjective way, if you want, are the same thing. They want to get to the first person experience, and the first person experience is absolutely the antithesis of what I explained last time, which is the first pupil perspective.
Right.
The first pupil perspective, it's impossible to base any change on what you feel. Even if it's been transmitted to you by someone of great manipulation capacity, even if you use that, you're not using means whereby. Means whereby are based on a number of movements occurring all at the same time. How do you guide this? So you need language, once again.
So you need to practice it. You need something to practice it.
Oh, yes. You have to learn. It's not even practice, but learn. And let me tell you.
Well, learn to practice, because if you're going on the subjective or somatic method, that you might be there, if you're lucky, for an hour even every day, or half an hour every day, and that would most musicians, for example, wouldn't be able to afford that. And then you don't know what to practice. You don't know what to study to practice. Is that
so? That's the difference, because I think that a somatic teacher or a touch teacher is not a real teacher. Is not a teacher in the sense that I have in mind. A teacher in the sense that I have in mind is someone that will help you to, in fact, grab intellectually things and start to make use of what you have collected and organized in order to solve problems when the teacher is not there.
Yeah.
When the teacher is absent. So you become your own teacher, and you will use the technique the teacher has used with you, with your own self, in order to learn more. You don't, as soon as you know the technique, you don't need the teacher in order to perform the exploration. So we are teaching experiments. We are not teaching results. That's a very big difference.
Yes.
So let's go into explaining how what will happen.
What is involved in the learning?
Yeah, what is involved in the learning? So we can describe movements in space. We need a system of orientation. We need to explain to the pupil words that we are going to use so that these words are understood. Yes? And so, for example, when I say forward, backward, up, down, outward, inward, as you know, it's absolutely necessary to define these words so that the person has a clear representation in the mind of what we are talking about. The second thing is that it's absolutely necessary that the person understands that we are not talking about muscles, that we are talking about segments, about parts. Alexander called them parts, And so what do we mean by parts? Well, parts are rigid levers that are moving relative to one another in the whole complex of the anatomical structure, and their movements, are happening geometrically. That's one thing you have to understand.
At the joints.
And so at the joints. So it's very important that the person has a clear idea of how we are going to control the movements. Because you can't control muscle movements. The muscle system is so complex. There are so many muscles, and each muscle has so many lines of actions that you can see. When you look at a muscle, you will see the fibers, the motor fibers, and you will find that, wow, a muscle has not one direction only. but can have many. If you imagine muscles like, for example, the trapezius, it's mind-boggling how many ways you can use the trapezius. Okay?
And it never exists on its own, and so even the way it connects information to the nerves to the brain is beyond chaos.
Yes, it's beyond chaos. Yes, it's absolutely erratic. It's impossible. When scientists have tried to see what the brain was receiving as information, it's amazing. It's like nearly infinite. It's and nearly random, by the way. Right. So we are not using that at all. We are using, in fact, another way of using language to create a function. A mediated function is to, for example, think, okay, if you think about your elbow, you can imagine touching the part that is the furthest away from your shoulder. There is a bone, and you want to touch it, and you will find a spot, yes? And we can give it a name. Giving a name to a spot on a bone is very, very clever. It's something that will, in fact, help you to guide your attention towards something you don't feel. Because there is a problem with feeling, is that you can't feel 10 spots at a time.
But you can coordinate them in your...
Yes, you can start having intentions. Intentions described in speech. That intention, for example, the first one, I want to pull the tip of the elbow that I've just described away from the center of the body. So we know that away from the center of the body is a very clear direction. And I say, okay, I will count 1, 2, 3, because there are rules of engagement. How long will it take for my movement to appear? Well, that has to be defined, because otherwise, how could you say that the action you're going to make is a conscious act?
That's right.
For it to be a conscious act, you need absolutely to know when it starts and when it finishes, because we know of acts. We don't know exactly when they started. We don't know exactly when we finished them. Can we call them conscious acts? No, we can't. Of course not. So it's possible to create a first movement and think, okay, I will have this first movement in mind, but at the same time, I just remembered that my ribs were seen as forward relative to the front of the torso.
Yeah.
So at the same moment as I will pull the tip of the elbow outward, I will see if I can pull the ribs backward in space.
Mm-hmm. So let me just stop you there. I'm going to just stop you there. That I think I certified as an Alexander teacher, did the same style of training that as you did, and then I think it was 2 years ago exactly almost that I started taking lessons with you. And when you introduced that concept of that a conscious act has to have a beginning and has to have an end, I mean. I don't know, for people who might be watching this who have some familiarity with Alexander technique or Alexander's writing or might have interest, that was a revolutionary concept for me, and it was also extremely useful. That concept that a conscious act has to be observable for it to be. Otherwise, who's the judge of whether that act was conscious or not? So exactly. I just wanted to add that in, because it changed my perspective of how I relate to myself and other people. Towards the positive. Yeah. So sorry.
Well,
go ahead.
That was started by two things. The first thing is Alexander. The second is Delsart. So the first, Alexander, when he defines what he means by lengthening the back, it's very interesting to read very, very closely what he's saying. How can he say that the person is lengthening the back or shortening the back? It's quite interesting because there are two different explanations, one in the first book and one in the second. I will start with the first one. He says, well, take a 6 inches piece of cardboard and look at the bottom of it. The first inch you don't consider, you consider just above it, before the middle. and you will find that if you measure the full length of the stripe,
yes.
And then afterwards you bend the lower part above the first inch, you bend the lower part, you will find that the distance has reduced. He says, of course, it's impossible to lengthen the spine. It's impossible to separate the vertebrae one away from one another. But if you, in fact, reduce the curve, and he's talking of the lower curve, it's
yes.
very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, then you discover that, of course, if you increase the curve, you reduce the stature. If you lengthen the curve, you lengthen the whole stature. So it's interesting because it's a geometrical explanation. It's not something I reduce the tension, a feeling of tension, or I have a feeling that I'm lengthening. No. It's geometrical. Yes, it's very clear. The second is Delsarte, because Delsarte has rules for conscious acts. And there is one rule, it's a rule number, and the rule of measure, and the rule of weight. The rule of numbers is that for Delsarte, there is a law that is called the law of dynamic wealth, and you will understand quickly what I mean if you've seen the first interview. It's the law of dynamic wealth is the wealth of a gesture
yes.
is proportional to the number of its agent in movement. Exactly as the more organs in a form, the greater its wealth. The more gesture brings into play joints, the more its wealth and power. It's exactly what we said earlier about sitting. If you are restraining movements, if there are less agent in action, well, you will be more unbalanced. And of course, you will feel less liberated from the movement system, and you will have to scratch when you are itched somewhere. You want to suppress one movement, release here or release there. Yes, there is no integration. So the wealth of gesture is very, very important to have in mind when you look at a shortening spine and you think, how many movements do I need? Well, and where do I need them? And there is something here is that the part of the structure that has the most joints, the part of the structure that has the most weight, the part of the structure that has the most import into the functioning of the system. Which is it?
The spine.
That's a question. Well, the torso.
Yes.
So we have to imagine something is that our sitting person is not aware of movements of the different parts of the torso is engaging. You will notice that the torso may be bent one way or another, but how is the bending done? How many parts are there involved in the torso? And how could the person direct consciously the movement? So that's what will come second, is that you will say to the person, okay, you're going to pull the tip of the elbow outward, you're going to pull the ribs back. Yes, but when you pull the ribs back, we don't want the top of the torso to move back at the same time. We want an antagonistic direction. Well, a movement has direction in space, yes?
Yes.
And so antagonistic movements means movement that have opposite directions. So when you pull the tip of the elbow outward, I want you to pull the ribs back and the throat forward. Simple experiment. Yes, all this is film. What we will see on film is that is the person starting the three movements at the same time? Is the person, for example, the person will do the movements, we ask the person to do the movement is a measure of 3, which means 2 seconds. 1 second between 1 and 2, 1 second between 2 and 3. So the person will say 1, 2, 3, we stop the video and we look. So we look first to see if all the movement has started at 1. Very often the person will say, but I started before. I say, yes, you're right. I think you started before. Why this answer? Well, it's because I want the person to reason another experiment. It's not the experiment that I'm doing with the person that counts. It's what the person is going to think about because of these experiments, and how to produce experiments that don't happen the same way. It's like counterfactual. You say, I see I am doing this all the time. I do not accept it. I will make a new experiment, and at this time, I will start all the movements together. Yeah? So 1, 2, 3, we will see if the person stops all the movement at the same time or not. Well, very often the person, has certainly not guided all the movements together during the 1, 2, 3. Very often you see something very strange. The person starts one movement and says, no, and stop the experiment. Why did you say no and stop the experiment? I was not pulling the iliac. I was not pulling the lower part. I was not pulling the middle part, or I was not pulling the top part, or I discovered. How did you know? But I felt it. So you stopped the experiment because of a feeling of what was happening. You have to understand that in mediated action, the control is not direct. You need an intermediation, It's not because direct is, and we call it engaining, like somebody that is moving too much and try to suppress the movements. No. We want to enhance movements. If you feel every movement you're making of the series, you can't feel them all at once.
No.
So you're stuck. So you have to abandon the old perspective, the old somatic perspective of feeling what you're doing and calling that control. Because that is subconscious control at its best. It's feeling control. We don't want that.
Well, that has fantastic.
Plunge in the dark. Plunge in the dark. I don't know what I'm doing. We will see on screen. And you will make judgment as to what you see in order to create a new experiment. But this has no end. How do you know? Have you practiced before that sort of thing? No. So how do you know it has no end?
So it's like guessing the results before any.
Yeah.
So it's getting.
The person is as like a preconception of the whole thing.
Yes.
And you think, well, you cannot know this. You need to try. And I am it's very easy for me to say that the person does not know this because I know otherwise. I have seen so many teachers, so many people having lessons and suddenly discovering that they could direct movements together. And more than 2 and 3. Alexander puts a limit to 12. Yes? Okay, I have not reached 12, but even 6, 7, 8 movements together and see them start at the same time, finish at the same time, and unfold in a progressive manner. Yes, everybody can do it. What you have to go through.
You just have to give. It's like the hardest thing is most people don't give themselves the opportunity to fail or the opportunity to laugh at themselves or the opportunity to say. And so in another way, I'm just thinking of musicians, but a lot of people, they'll say, I'm not good at talking to new people, or I get afraid on stage. And it says, well, how do you know? Well, because it happened once. Yes. And then someone told me. And I go to these meditation classes for people who are anxious. So I must be anxious. Because as soon as I'm not anxious, then I lose some friends. I'm taking an extreme case.
Yeah.
But in the same way, I mean, sitting quietly and closing your eyes and letting your mind wander can be a wonderful thing. But if it's been being promoted to change behavior, well, I'm just that's that maybe it's used, maybe it works. I mean, I can't decide what works for people, but it remains to be seen.
But it's good that you said this because it goes right in the good direction. I will explain. What we, as a teacher, my interaction with the person is to produce questions, is to produce dialogue. And the person will soon discover that my dialogue is very directed, always in the same manner. Always, let's observe. Let's see what really happens. Let's compare with the plan we have in mind. We wanted the front part to be aligned on the same psychological vertical line. Yes? What is it we've got? We've got, yes, at the start, this movement is this movement in the right direction?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that movement in the right direction. So yes, so what about the elbow? Well, I don't see the point of the elbow. The elbow has nothing to do with it. The elbow is part of the arm, and we are trying to organize the torso. Okay, I understand, but nevertheless, what is the elbow doing, and what is the relationship we can reason between the movement of the elbow and the movement of the top part of the torso? Is there no relationship, as you imagine, or is there a relationship? Can you see that when your elbow starts to go backward, your shoulder goes backwards, and as a result, the weight of the head is blown back, and you tend to protrude the middle part of the torso.
Yeah.
So somehow it's related. Yes, but it pulls a lot when I do that. It's as if my shoulder doesn't want to go there. I feel a lot of tension. Okay, I understand that you feel a lot of tension. Is that why you're making that face on the screen when you do it? Yes, that's why. So yes, I understand. But the dialogue is to say, well, is it not normal if you have always been used to movements that are bringing your shoulder backward, that the part of the muscles that are in fact producing the antagonistic directions are out of use? Are weak, so that they need to perform way too much compared to someone that would be organized differently and would perform that movement regularly. Yes, so you have to allow for progression, a progressive or what we call a constructive approach, where you have to accept, first of all, to look like all tense, because, of course, at first, well, in order to produce the movement in the right directions, which means the antagonistic direction we are interested in, you have to disassociate the movement that are normally associated by your habitual reaction, which feels okay, and now it feels all queer, very strange, very wrong. Of course, there is always the picture, the video. So you look at the video and say, how can I feel falling backward when I look at the video? It's fake. All the weight is forward for the moment. How can I feel so much and with such clarity, such the ultimate judgment? I am falling back. Well, when I see it on screen as a detached from it, as if it was someone else, I look at it and I say, no way. What is this? I am. My feelings of movements are lying to me.
Yes.
To a point that is absolutely bewildering. So yes, there are in the lessons there are stages that are not really agreeable. That's absolutely clear. I help people to learn to feel bad. That's one my big my big card, or I had a T-shirt. Learn to feel bad. Come. Yes, that's for sure. But there is always this idea that the students has to direct his dialogue with himself. Directing the dialogue with yourself is to say, well, I'm not good at this. Who say that? I'm talking to myself, by the way. I'm not talking to someone else. I'm starting to have a discourse about what is the statement I am making, and the possibility that this statement is a habit, is going always the same direction. Always, because I have placated myself for a long time, and my teachers have, and so I've integrated this, it's part of my discourse. It's very interesting to be in the studying situation, learning situation, and think, wow, when I see myself reacting to this lesson, is that I react all the time like this? So very often I have students say, but I watched the lesson, yes. Do I interrupt all the time like this? Well, I say, yes. I say, but it's awful. No, it's not awful. It's part of the studying. But how can you study something if you interrupt all the time? Well, with difficulty, but that's your way. Okay? It's just, and so you have to discuss and to dialogue with yourself and to think, okay, there are habits of body, of movements, but there are habits of mind. And so the person is going to look at her habits of mind with a honest dialogue, with a moral attitude of kindness, a moral attitude of calm and collected. Yes, there is this, but look, there is that, and that. So measure. We have to use measure in discourse when we learn. Because it's a moment of course, because you learn something, it's because you don't know it. If you knew everything, you wouldn't need to learn.
That's right.
Well, the greatest difficulty to learn is to think that you know. If you are sure that you know how to behave, that you have the correct Alexander technique behavior, don't have a lesson. It's no point.
Yeah.
You know.
And it's interesting, just that simple action of do you think you can do this experiment of moving this spot forward or back in relation to something becomes like almost like a destructive force on the person's entire personality. You know, it's like
well, yes.
If you don't have if you're not in the mind to say, well, that was just a movement, and this is just one moment of my personality. And is it possible for me to discover other ways of my personality? And I can
as a teacher, when this happens, as a teacher, you have to be present. You have to be helping the person create the correct dialogue in order to further the experiment. Of course, when you play the violin for the first time, it's not going to sound good. It's don't expect it to sound like a good violinist. It's not possible. You have to understand that. So you have to understand satisfaction as something that will come as a result of a process. It's a process of learning. So we have to debunk these ideas and these dialogues that people have in their head when they are learning. So many people have had bad experience with mathematics, for example, and so they will freeze. They will start talking to themselves too much when they are confronted with the problem. Instead of thinking of the problem, they are thinking of what they think of themselves in the action of doing the problem. You know, wow, dear. So that is happening. And so that should happen during the lessons, because when you ask a person, even an Alexander teacher that has been teaching for 30 years, you ask the person to, consciously control afterwards. What are the effect of the series of instruction they have pronounced? So they say, well, I've got this intention of having this point move there, I have the intention of this point to move there, and I have the intention, very important, to have this part not move in the same direction. So there are directions of definite performance, the thing you want to move, and there are instruction of definite inhibition. Alexander explained that in the first book, but then this was wiped off in the second edition.
But that is a technique of learning to play the guitar or the violin. There's things that you must do, and there's the things that you must prevent yourself from doing, and they cannot be separate. If you separate them.
So, yes, but there is a way to present this in a different way. You can say there are movements that you want to see later on film, and there are movements that you don't want to see later on film.
But in the case of music, we're talking about the hearing capacity.
Not only. Because in every musical learning, there is a problem that people will tend to play for themselves. They will tend to hear themselves play and focus their attention on what they are playing themselves. And when suddenly the problem is different, when suddenly it's the problem is to play in a group, is to accord with a group, to compose with a group, then all their training is for nothing, because they still play for themselves and they can't hear the others. So the same problem will arise in any field, not only mathematical or intellectual fields or fields of movements or fields of music. Every single time you will find the same problem. How to, in fact, have a way to perform and a way to control that are separate, that are not like united in an automatic activity. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose Delsarte, having been a composer, and I just got reminded something of one of my favorite composers, Arnold Schoenberg. He says in 1921 at the instructions of a piece that he's composed, he said, and something to the effect of, and please don't add anything extra to the music. Like, just play it as it is. And this is what I mean with this new technique of vocalization. And please don't add anything that's not there. As in, don't try to make additional affect onto the music, but listen to the music. And, that one piece is one of the most groundbreaking and most beloved or hated, but most well-constructed pieces, even almost 100 years later. But I didn't realize until reading the score, there's this specific instruction of please be aware of what's in front of you and don't add.
You have to place yourself now in the position of one of the player.
Yes.
And if one of the player is playing for himself his own piece, how can he, in fact, listen to the music? He cannot. And so he's going to be a disruptive player in the whole group. And if he's been taught to play like that, well, if he's learned to play like that, it's not his fault. It's the fault of the teaching. So you have to change the teaching in order for the person to be able to detach the performance and the control from one another. And that is a big part of the lessons I give. So that the person will stop being what we call self-conscious. When you're self-conscious, you're self-judging yourself second by second of your performance. Plunging in the dark is different. Plunging in the dark is, I have clear intentions. I want this, I want that, I want that, I want that. I want all this to happen in 3 seconds or 2 seconds. And I don't want to see this. I don't want to see this. I don't want to see this. Okay. I've got 4 instructions of definite performance, 3 instructions of definite inhibition. And I'm going to unite all this into a moment, a little story, a little measure. Yes, in time and space. Good. Well, at first, the pupil will discover that his habits of mind go against it. The person wants to feel, wants to make sure, wants to be right, wants to, did I really stop this? If the person talks to herself and says, did I really stop this? The whole concerted activity, that all together is completely lost. And what is very nice, it screams on film. The person will say, wow, what is this? It all started well. What happening here? Why is it suddenly all wrong? Why am I pulling here and this is going there? I say, well, this is not something you thought at that moment. So conscious control and conscious guidance, finally, are not conscious control and conscious guidance of movements in space and time. It's conscious control and conscious guidance of what you think at the moment you're performing. Yes?
Yes.
So the whole thing suddenly
becomes... But they live inside movements, Jean-de.
Yes, they live inside movements, but you have to exert some control. The control is not about what you want to see, what you don't want to see, because that's going to be after. The moment is that I am going to plunge in the dark, and I want to be very, very clear about what is the intentions. And that has to be before I start. Because otherwise you can't listen to the music. You're just judging this or judging that. You're not listening. Stop interfering, Alexander would say. Meaning, at the moment of performing the 5 intentions, the 5 or 6 intentions, we see that you're not, in fact, working by memory, which is now a mediated memory. It's not a memory of the feelings because you have no idea what it's going to feel. Because it's possible to feel 1 movement or maybe 2. But when you start to unite movements together in a way that is new to you, that you've never done, you have no feeling whatsoever to support what you're going to control. So plunge. It's, as I say, just plunge. It's just being a teacher, helping people to create experiment, making people somehow see how they react in the experiment, and only in the experiment, how they inhibit only in the experiment when they start a movement. What we see when we ask a person to move one part relative to another, most of the time there is something very surprising, is that the person is able to achieve the movements. Yes?
Yes,
yes. I say, I pull the throat forward, I pull the ribs back, I want them on the same vertical line, fine. But what is interesting is that when we look at the video, what we see is that, well, that was good. But what happened is that, in fact, the person managed to do it while going very far down, while bending the torso forward. So the person says, yes, when I do that, I have to bend the torso forward. Yes, I see that when you do that, you have to bend the torso forward. Or? What do you mean, or? Well, is it possible to organize the 2 movements and now have something new, which is prevent, first of all, the 2 movements to go toward one another? No, I don't think so. Oh, you don't think so? You've experimented earlier then? No, I think so. Well, you think so without no experiment? Oh, yes, you need to test. Let's test, experiment. So you are going to pull the ribs back and you're going to pull the throat forward in order to get them on the same vertical line side. This is something that we can measure on screen, we can trace, we will see that. But now we want to see if it's possible to expand instead of narrow the parts. And the person will try and will say, I said, you see, I said it. I say, yes, you said you were going to shorten, you are not being able to stop the shortening. But you have been able to stop the shortening. You shorten half as much as the last time. Yes, but I shorten. Yes, but you shorten half the amount of last time.
So you're using these instruments to actually teach this person to speak a different language, or to speak this language of separating themselves from what they think they can do.
Yes.
And they're learning to speak a language of how to actually experiment and create new movements.
Yes. And create new experiments.
Like new phoneme, a phoneme at a time, a word at a time. They're building this technique.
Yes, it's always this idea that, I want to make a comment, a separate comment that seems to have no rapport with that one, but I think there is a very strong connection between the two, is that at first children, they use the same words as we do, but their meaning is very different from ours, yes. You know? Their meaning is more like a word is a family, is part of a family. Mm-hmm. Like when you see, what is a brother? Well, they know what's a brother. Say, yes, but give me an explanation. You get a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old to give you an explanation of what is a brother. And they will say, but a brother is like Quentin, because Quentin is the name of his brother. Or they will find 2 persons which are brothers and they will give you their names. They have no idea. They cannot separate their experience, yes, from the meaning.
Yes.
But after a while, you will get somebody that will say, well, you need an 8-year-old now. A health-year-old will say, well, a brother is someone that has the same father or the same mother as the person we are talking about. Well, you see that what happened is that there is a new level, like a concept of a different level that will create the name brother, and it's not a family, it's a structure. So when I teach, I want people to start being able to observe, but not observe. There are different way of observing. Oh, I'm good. Oh, I'm bad. Oh, I like what I don't like. Some up, some down, which is the very basic form of judgment that we are not interested in.
It's not very useful in learning.
It's not useful at all. Even if you're a sum up, it builds up the pressure on you. Or if you're sum down, anyway, I am sum down. What do you want? I can do better. I cannot do better. In both ways, it's really affecting the openness to exploring, the openness to the kind of observation we are after. The kind of observation that we need to promote is to say, well, there are structures, there are links. Things don't go with quality. As for example, somebody was telling me, I am not supple. I say, well, you're talking of a substance. A substance is supple. Supple doesn't fit what we do with the movement we do. I'm not used to doing this movement. Yes. So you are supple in other circumstances. What we are interested in is expanding the way the observation will create new possibilities, expand slightly further.
Yes.
Not staying inside the sort of system that is well understood, well accepted between people. No. We want to refuse. But basically, there is this idea that what is just the result of the past learning, and we want to go over that.
Yes.
Don't satisfy yourself with it.
I mean, we're also living in a world that subconsciously is still talking about Darwinian, weird parts of Darwinian theory, which means that your genetics will define exactly what you are.
Yes, exactly.
Which, we're saying no to that concept as far as everyone has the same capacity, but in a way we are applying it to ourselves subconsciously, saying I'm not supple.
I am pro education.
Yes.
I am not in this evolutionary the use of the evolutionary mystic into education is for me a dead end. I am not into that. I am into education.
Yes, I know.
So
yes.
What is it we could refuse? So we could refuse that I can't do this. I could refuse that I can't do that. And so what kind of experiment should I start constructing in order to, in fact, expand my views and go further? And that is what makes lessons fantastic. Otherwise, well, I can tell you, it's stale. The idea is to make people into a mold and have them move into that mold. Oh my God, I can't do that. It's boring. So when somebody engaged into that and found that to make a living, well, finally they have to sell that to people. They grow little, so they grow aggressive. They don't they don't respect other people for exploring, of course, because it's
Are you talking about Alexander now?
Of the no, I don't know. I'm talking in general, but yes, sometimes. Yes, it's true. Yeah. Yes. So that was nice.
Well,
I'm looking at the time now.
This is fantastic, John. That we probably have to pick it up on another night. But yeah. It's been amazing to have this discussion, and especially I really invite people who might be watching this to give you an email, give you a call. All the information can be found underneath this video, and to find out some new ways to sort of discover new possibilities in how they can organize their thinking. And again, my guest tonight and the Feynman factor has been Jondo Mazzoero, who lives in south of France or thereabouts. Is it Montpellier? Yes. Montpellier. Did I say that correctly?
Not too far from Montpellier. Considered in Melbourne, yes, it's not too far from Montpellier.
All right, John.
It's a very nice country, by the way. Yeah.
Well, they could come to visit you, or they could come to visit you on Skype. Either way.
Well, it's easier to visit me on Skype.
And well, thanks again.
Thank you very much too.